Imagine this: everything in your life seems perfect. You're married to the love of your life and you've built a peaceful suburban existence. But one day your wife starts acting distant, hesitant. The reason? Her old college flame, someone she never talks about, just moved in next door. And things only get stranger from there. Daniel Carter never imagined that a single afternoon would shatter the quiet rhythm of his life. His marriage to Lila had always been a source of comfort and stability. Weekends were spent gardening or strolling through the neighborhood, hand in hand. But that Sunday, as he trimmed the hedge in their front yard, a moving truck rumbled into the driveway of the house next door. Curious, Daniel paused his work to watch the new neighbors. A tall, confident man emerged from the truck, his casual wave directed toward Daniel. But it wasn't the man's charm or easy smile that unnerved him, it was Lila's reaction. "Lila," Daniel called from the yard, "come see this." When she stepped outside, her face froze mid-smile. The color drained from her cheeks, her usually relaxed posture stiffening. "Is that ... Elliot?" she murmured, almost too softly for Daniel to hear. "Elliot who?" "Ma?" Before she could answer, the man approached. "Lila," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Wow, what are the odds?" Elliot Reed. Her college ex, the one she rarely talked about, was now their neighbor. That evening, Lila was distant. She barely touched her dinner and avoided eye contact with Daniel. When he finally asked if she was okay, her response was clipped and dismissive. "It's just strange seeing someone from my past," she said, forcing a smile. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. Elliot quickly became the center of attention in the neighborhood. With his charm and effortless charisma, he was hosting gatherings and telling captivating stories about his travels within days of moving in. Daniel noticed the way people gravitated toward him, including Lila. At a neighborhood barbecue, Daniel kept a close eye on the two of them. Lila seemed hesitant, her laughter a little too forced as Elliot recounted their college escapades to a group of neighbors. "I can't believe you still remember that," Lila said, nervously twisting her wedding ring. "How could I forget?" Elliot replied, flashing her a knowing smile that made Daniel's blood boil. Elliot wasn't just settling into the neighborhood, he was making himself a constant presence in their lives. He volunteered to help Daniel fix a broken fence, and although Daniel politely declined, Elliot insisted. It wasn't the help Daniel minded, it was the way Elliot used every opportunity to remind him of his shared history with Lila. "You know," Elliot said one afternoon as they worked on the fence, "Lila and I used to talk about living in a place like this. Funny how life works out." Daniel's hands tightened on the hammer. This wasn't just a friendly neighbor, it was a man who seemed intent on stirring up trouble. In the weeks that followed, Daniel noticed subtle changes in Lila that gnawed at his sense of normalcy. Once the cheerful, creative soul of their home, she now seemed preoccupied, lost in a world Daniel couldn't access. Late one night, Daniel woke to find her side of the bed empty. He found her in her studio, the dim glow of her laptop illuminating her face. She was staring at an old photograph, a candid shot from her college days. Daniel recognized the younger Lila immediately, her wide smile beaming at the camera. Beside her, arms slung casually around her shoulders, was Elliot. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice startling her. Lila slammed the laptop shut, her face flushed. "Just looking at old photos," she said, brushing past him. That night, Daniel lay awake, his mind racing. Lila had never hidden things from him before, but now there were locked doors and half-truths. It wasn't just the late nights that troubled him. Lila missed important moments, like the anniversary dinner he had carefully planned. When she walked in hours late, her only explanation was a hurried, "I got caught up with work." Work, Daniel pressed. Or something else. Her defensiveness was a dagger. "Daniel, you're being ridiculous. Nothing's going on." But he wasn't so sure. Unable to shake his suspicions, Daniel began to piece together fragments of Lila's past with Elliot. His search took him to the attic, where a stack of dusty boxes sat forgotten. One was labeled college days. Inside, Daniel found a treasure trove of memories, photos, yearbooks, and, most tellingly, a collection of old letters. He hesitated, feeling a pang of guilt, before unfolding the first one. The handwriting was unmistakably Elliot's, his tone playful but tinged with something deeper. As he sifted through the letters, one stood out. Its final line sent a chill down Daniel's spine. "What we had isn't over. It's just waiting for the right moment." Daniel's hands trembled as he placed the letter back in the box. It wasn't just nostalgia, Elliott felt it was obsession. When Lila came home that evening, Daniel confronted her. "I found your box in the attic," he began, watching her face pale. "What were you doing in there?" she snapped, her voice rising in panic. "Looking for answers," he replied. "And I found them." Her silence spoke volumes. Daniel wasn't the only one noticing things. Mrs. Margot Hensley, the neighborhood's unofficial watchdog, had a knack for catching things others missed. She was also the first to mention something that made Daniel's stomach twist. "I saw your wife last night," she said casually as she watered her rose bushes. "Oh?" Where Daniel asked, his curiosity piqued. "In your backyard. She was talking to that Elliott fellow for quite some time." Daniel froze. "Are you sure?" Mrs. Hensley nodded, her tone conspiratorial. It looked serious. She seemed upset, and he was awfully close. Daniel's mind raced. That was the night Lila had claimed to be working late in her studio. His unease grew into a slow burning anger. That evening, as Lila cooked dinner, Daniel couldn't keep it in any longer. "Why didn't you tell me you talked to Elliott last night?" he asked, his voice tight. Lila blinked, startled. "What? Who told you that?" "Does it matter?" Daniel shot back. "Why are you keeping things from me?" Her defensiveness was immediate. "It wasn't a big deal. He wanted to talk, so I listened. That's all." But to Daniel, it wasn't just listening. It was another secret. Despite the tension building at home, Elliott didn't ease off. Instead, he extended an olive branch, or at least it seemed that way. One afternoon, he knocked on Daniel's door with an invitation. "Dinner at my place," Elliott said with his trademark smile. "Let's clear the air." Daniel hesitated, but Lila, standing behind him, spoke up. "I think we should go," she said softly. At Elliott's house, the atmosphere was unnervingly warm. Candles flickered, and a delicious meal was laid out. But beneath the surface, Daniel could feel the tension. As the evening went on, Elliott steered the conversation toward their college days. His stories were peppered with little details that only Lila would understand, inside jokes, shared memories, moments Daniel had never heard of. "Do you remember that trip to the lake?" Elliott asked, his eyes gleaming. Lila nodded, laughing nervously. "Barely. It's been years." "Oh, come on. You haven't forgotten that sunset," Elliott said, leaning forward. "I haven't." Daniel's grip on his wine glass tightened. He felt like a spectator in a play he hadn't been cast in. On the walk home, Daniel broke the silence. That was ... uncomfortable. Lila sighed, her voice weary. "He's just being Elliott. It doesn't mean anything." But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that it did. Daniel's unease soon gave way to a relentless need for clarity. One evening, while Lila was out running errands, Daniel found himself pacing in the living room. Every unanswered question echoed in his mind, louder and louder, until he found himself in her studio. He hadn't planned to snoop, but then he saw it. Tucked away in the corner of her desk was a second phone, one he didn't recognize. His pulse quickened as he powered it on. The lock screen was unprotected, and as the screen lit up, he saw a string of messages. The texts were between Lila and Elliott. At first, they seemed harmless exchanges about neighborhood events or casual greetings. But as he scrolled further, a different tone emerged. "Do you ever think about those nights at the lake?" Elliott had written. "Elliott, we shouldn't talk like this," Lila had replied. The words felt like a dagger. The most recent message, sent just hours earlier, read, "I still remember the way you laughed under the stars. Do you?" Daniel couldn't breathe. His worst fears were unfolding in front of him. When Lila returned home, he was waiting for her, the phone in hand. "What is this?" he demanded. Her eyes widened, first in shock and then in guilt. "Daniel, I can explain." "Explain what?" he interrupted, his voice shaking. "That you've been talking to him behind my back. That you're letting him pull you back into his world." Tears streamed down her face as she pleaded with him. "It's not what you think. I just felt nostalgic. I swear, it's nothing more than that." But Daniel wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Determined to put an end to the spiraling uncertainty, Daniel decided to confront the source of his torment. The next morning, he walked next door and knocked on Elliot's door. Elliot answered with his usual easy grin. "Daniel, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Daniel stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "Cut the crap, Elliot. I know what you're doing." Elliot raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Doing? I'm not sure what you mean." "You're trying to wedge yourself between us," Daniel said, his voice low but firm. "But it's not going to work." Elliot leaned casually against the counter, his confidence maddeningly intact. "Look, man, I'm not trying to cause problems. If Lila wanted me gone, she'd say so. Maybe you should ask her why she hasn't." The implication hit Daniel like a ton of bricks. Elliot wasn't just insinuating, he was daring Daniel to question his wife's loyalty further. When Daniel returned home, he confronted Lila again, this time laying all the cards on the table. "Elliot thinks you're hesitating," he said. "Are you?" Lila's response was immediate. "No, Daniel, I love you." But Elliot, she hesitated, searching for the right words. "He reminds me of a part of myself I left behind. That doesn't mean I want it back, but I needed to understand it." Her explanation left Daniel torn. Was it closure she was seeking, or something more dangerous? The breaking tension between Daniel and Lila seemed to reach its peak when Elliot's true intentions began to surface. One evening, as Daniel returned home from work, he overheard Elliot talking to another neighbor, his tone laced with smug confidence. "Patience is everything," Elliot said, chuckling. "Some things are worth waiting for, and I've always known what I wanted." The neighbor laughed awkwardly, but Daniel's blood boiled. It wasn't just a game to Elliot he was plotting, deliberately exploiting Lila's vulnerabilities. Fueled by anger, Daniel cornered Lila that night. "Elliot isn't just here to make friends. He's trying to worm his way back into your life, and you're letting him." Lila's eyes filled with guilt and frustration. "You think I don't see that? I thought I could handle it, but he's persistent." "Then why didn't you tell me?" Daniel demanded. "Because I didn't want you to see me like this," Lila admitted, her voice breaking. "Like I'm caught between the person I used to be and the person I want to be with you." That confession was all Daniel needed. They couldn't defeat this together if they weren't honest with each other. The next day, Daniel made the choice to confront Elliot one final time, but this time Lila joined him. They stood at Elliot's doorstep, united as a team. "What we had is over," Elliot, Lila said firmly. "I've made my choice, and it's not you." Elliot's mask of confidence faltered for the first time. "You don't mean that?" he said, his voice wavering. "I do," Lila said, her voice resolute. "It's time for you to move on." For the first time since his arrival, Elliot seemed unsure of himself. He gave a small, bitter laugh and shook his head. "You're making a mistake," he muttered, before closing the door. That night, Lila and Daniel sat together on the couch, the weight of the last few weeks finally lifting. They decided to attend couples counseling, both acknowledging the cracks that had been exposed in their relationship and their determination to heal together. A week later, Elliot packed his things and moved away. But before he left, he slid a note under their door. "This isn't over." Daniel burned it without hesitation. "Yes, it is," he said, wrapping his arm around Lila. Their bond, though tested, emerged stronger. Thank you so much for watching this story unfold. What would you do if your spouse's ex moved in next door? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more gripping tales like this one. See you in the next story.